crimson. So every night before me and my baby.
Have you ever wondered why? Throughout the second half of the 20th century, so many legendary black musicians died in such deeply tragic ways. Why did the geniuses who once wrote songs that shook all of America end up losing their lives alone in empty rooms or parking lots? Some collapsed from stab wounds right outside their homes. Others died naked in the middle of the night, leaving behind Hollywood's biggest secrets. Who were they? What drove them to the brink of despair, and why? After everything, did the spotlight turn into a cold grave for such gifted lives? Come with me as we open the hidden door to these 21 shocking deaths. 21. Roger Troutman, the final funk track on a blood-stained parking lot. Have you ever imagined a funk genius? The man who turned a recording studio into a factory of immortal grooves, ending his life on a cold morning, sprawled on blood-soaked concrete right outside that same studio. Roger Troutman is a name anyone who loves 80s funk has heard. Because he was the one who created More Bounce to the Ounce, a track that shook every dance floor and seeped into every alley of American hip-hop for decades. People called him the king of robot sound, the golden hand that could turn any melody into a hit. But few knew that behind the stage lights, Roger was drowning in mounting debt from failed real estate investments. The tension kept escalating, especially between him and his older brother and manager, Larry. They fought until their hair turned gray over the money that kept vanishing without explanation. Then the tragedy struck on the morning of April 25, 1999. Roger left home while it was still dark, driving to Troutman's Sound Lab to record new tracks for a solo album. As soon as he stepped out of the car, a dry gunshot cracked the air. The bullet tore through his chest, and the parking lot quickly turned crimson. People said Roger still tried to crawl into the guard room, his trembling hand clutching the door handle before he collapsed, his eyes wide open as if he wanted to utter a final confession. The more heartbreaking detail came about 20 minutes later, when police found his brother Larry dead in a Lincoln Continental parked a few blocks away. A gun lay abandoned on the seat, the bullet wound in his head sealing a grim truth. People said Roger's last months were a suffocating series of arguments. He and Larry, the brother who was also his manager, clashed again and again over the massive sums lost to failed projects. The enormous debt drove them to blame each other without end. Roger had started to think about ending their business partnership to save his own name and the studio. He had prepared the termination papers for Larry, planning to file them right after finishing the new recordings. That, they say, was the final straw that pushed Larry past the point of no return. When police cordoned off the scene, many people just stood there in silence, unable to believe that the two brothers who once wrote such famous songs had died so horribly, leaving behind a trail of blood and a grief that would never be washed away. News of the tragedy left the whole city of Dayton stunned. No one thought everything would end so fast. Just one night before, Roger was still talking about the new album and his hopes of starting over, while Larry was still the older brother who had lifted him up on every stage. But in a single short morning, 2 lives vanished, leaving a recording studio so quiet it chilled the bone. They said when medics carried Roger's body away, the crowd burst into tears, some covering their faces and sobbing because they could not accept it was real. Longtime fans stood rooted to the parking lot, staring at the dark stain drying under the sun as if it still held the warmth of a genius stolen from this world. 20. James Carr, the soul drugged to death in a moldy apartment. You've probably heard The Dark End of the Street and thought it was just a heartbreaking love song about betrayal. But once you learn that the man who sang it also died in his own dark end of the street, you'll never hear that melody the same way again. James Carr was once hailed as the man with the saddest voice in America. He didn't just sing for the brokenhearted. He embodied the pain of a man quietly unraveling, mentally slipping further away with each passing day. By the end of his life, James was no longer a singer. He was a breathing corpse, slowly drained by medication, forgotten by fans, and buried alive in his own apartment. On January 7, 2001, Carr's body was found slumped on an old couch inside his South Memphis apartment. According to the Shelby County Health Department, the official cause of death was late-stage lung cancer. But investigators noted signs of severe dehydration, saying it looked as though he'd been starved and left without medical care for days. Neighbors reported that no one had seen James step outside for over a week. What they did hear, however, was his voice, muttering old songs at 3 a.m., sometimes shouting hoarsely, "They're taking my voice! Stop them!" There was one thing almost no one outside his family knew. James Carr had been battling severe bipolar disorder, requiring lithium and heavy sedatives for nearly 30 years. In his final years, long after the gigs dried up, his relatives began managing his medication. And that's when the whispers started. Rumors swirled that someone close had intentionally over-medicated him to gain control of his publishing rights. A volunteer nurse who visited him in late 2000 later recalled, "He was curled up in the corner, blank stare, drooling on himself. Couldn't even say his name. But when I played an old recording of his, he just started crying. No words, just tears, like a child." Few people know this, but the rights to The Dark End of the Street were quietly transferred to a new holder in December 2000, just weeks before Carr died. A cousin later alleged that the power of attorney document had been signed while James was under heavy sedation. The truth was never confirmed. The lawyer declined to comment, his medical records were sealed, and when Carr was finally buried, only a few morgue workers stood by the grave. It's said that in his nightstand drawer there was an old Polaroid, a snapshot of him on stage in 1967, mid-song, eyes blazing. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "They took the stage. Now they're taking my memory too." James Carr's death wasn't just the end of an artist. It was a chilling reminder. Sometimes the voices that once silenced America are left to die like nameless madmen, in darkness and in silence, as if they never existed at all. 19. Jesse Belvin, The Fatal Highway. There are nights when people believe a song can melt away hatred, only to find that just hours later. The singer himself lay dying on a road no one could reach in time. Jesse Belvin's death is still a raw wound no one wants to face. Jesse was once called the bright hope of R&B, the man whose gentle voice made both white and black audiences fall silent to listen. At just 27, he signed a major contract with RCA Victor, ready to rise as the new Nat King Cole of America. But that success also made him a target for those who despised him. His wife, Joanne, said many nights Jesse sat alone in the living room, gripping a threatening letter in his hand, murmuring, "If they really come, I don't know how to protect you and the baby." On the night of February 6, 1960, Jesse performed at the first integrated concert in Little Rock. When the lights came on, hundreds of people shouted curses, plastic chairs flew past his head, and someone stood up screaming, "You won't leave here alive." Still, Jesse sang the whole song, his eyes fierce but full of fear. Hours later, he and his wife drove their Cadillac across U.S. Highway 70. A sharp, dry explosion cracked the air as the tire blew apart. The car flipped again and again, the sound of shattering glass mixing with screams. When police arrived, Jesse had died at the wheel, his face covered in blood. His wife was barely breathing, clutching his hand without strength to speak his name one last time. Some said they saw two figures in long coats lingering around the wreck at midnight. Rumors spread that someone had cut the tire to teach Jesse a lesson. In the trunk, a pristine cassette demo still held the last recording Jesse had titled, "I'll Make It Home," like a promise to return. But in the end, he never made it home again. 18. Paul Williams, The First Temptation to Lay Down the Gun. Next on the list of men who wrote unforgettable songs only to depart in bitterness. You might find it hard to believe that a gifted songwriter, who once penned melodies that mesmerized all of America, finally took his own life in the driver's seat of an old Cadillac. Paul Williams was not only the distinctive baritone voice of The Temptations, but also the group's co-founder and co-writer of hits like Don't Look Back and Just My Imagination. He was the one who devised the harmonies and choreography every member had to memorize to the last beat. Throughout the 60s, he was called the Performance Machine, able to sing 3 shows in a row without losing his voice. But behind the dazzling lights lay a life so exhausted few dared to look. Paul suffered from sickle cell anemia, a disease that left him in such pain he could barely stand on stage. At the same time, unpaid taxes over $80,000 and relentless touring wore him down until he turned to alcohol and painkillers just to survive each day. Friends said many nights Paul would drive around Detroit until dawn. He often parked by the old stadium, playing cassette demos of unfinished melodies, gripping a bottle tight, sometimes in a voice reeking of liquor. He would say, "I'm not myself anymore." Every song ends. A month before that final day, Paul discovered Motown's ledgers had been altered, costing him tens of thousands in royalties. He slammed the table in rage and stormed out, his eyes red as if he would break down. On the morning of August 17, 1973, when the sun had just cleared the warehouse roofs by the parking lot, a security guard saw blood spattered across the Cadillac's back window. Inside, Paul had slumped over the wheel. A Smith & Wesson revolver lay on the floor mat, spent casings scattered around his feet. Police found a white envelope on the passenger seat containing an 8-page suicide note. The family never released it all. Only a few lines leaked out. "I'm sorry for failing. I'm so tired. Please forgive me." News of his death stunned thousands. Many fans drove hundreds of miles just to stand beside the tarp-covered Cadillac, gazing through the fogged glass and crying for the songwriter who had scored the soundtrack of their youth. But in the end, Paul Williams was the first temptation to fall, a cruel reminder that sometimes no amount of fame can save a soul already broken beyond repair. 17. Johnny Guitar Watson, the final guitar chord on Japanese soil. The moment the guitar fell straight to the floor, releasing a harsh, cracking sound that rang across Yokohama Hall. No one in the crowd understood they were witnessing the second a legend collapsed in the middle of his last song. Johnny Guitar Watson was more than an artist. He was a pioneer who dared to tear down the walls between blues and funk, blending them into a wild sound that even Jimi Hendrix and Snoop Dogg had to bow down to. From the 1950s all the way into the 1990s, he was called the idol of the idols, a man who held his guitar like his own heart, pouring every joy and sorrow into each string. No one could have guessed that behind hundreds of blazing performances was a life cracked apart. Johnny was addicted to cocaine so badly that his friends had lost count of how many times he disappeared after shows, quietly sitting in hotel rooms with bloodshot eyes, smiling as he whispered, "This white powder is eating away my soul." No one dared to say it aloud, but everyone feared the day he would no longer be strong enough to stand on stage. On May 17, 1996, in a packed hall of Japanese fans, Johnny held his heavy guitar and began to solo Superman Lover. His playing was mesmerizing, but in the middle of the climax, his hand suddenly froze and his face turned pale. In that moment, the entire hall went dead silent. The guitar fell, the strings snapping out a cold, sharp tone like a death notice. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed completely in front of the microphone, though doctors rushed on stage to revive him. His heart stopped beating just minutes later. When the crew packed up backstage, they were stunned to find 12 thick notebooks inside Johnny's suitcase, filled cover to cover with tangled lines of writing. In them, he admitted he had once been diagnosed with an aortic aneurysm but dared not tell anyone because he feared the audience's disappointment. He wrote that, if he had to die, he only wished to die while the guitar was still singing. The recording of that night is still kept by Japanese fans as a sorrowful legacy. Every time the final guitar notes play, people remember the moment Johnny Watson took his last breath, letting his soul dissolve into music, just as he had spent a lifetime unable to escape that obsession. 16. O.V. Wright, a soul burned away by addiction. Have you ever heard a voice so beautiful it gave you chills and wondered, what was his life like behind the curtain? O.V. Wright once made audiences across the American South cry with "That's How Strong My Love Is" by the late 1960s. He was seen as the only singer worthy of carrying on Otis Redding's legacy, but backstage, Wright was sinking into heroin so deep that there were months he spent $40,000 just to keep going. A guitarist once recalled finding him passed out in the studio bathroom, the needle still in his arm. Some who knew him claimed Wright even pawned away all his publishing rights to pay off drug debts, leaving him nearly penniless by 1975. The price finally came due on the morning of November 30th, 1980, when his wife woke up to find him sprawled across the living room floor, eyes wide open, lips dark purple. Doctors listed the official cause as a heart attack, but an old manager insisted that night Wright had taken 3 times the lethal dose of stimulants. Even worse, after his funeral, rumors spread that the Southern Soul label had paid $100,000 to bury the toxicology report, fearing the scandal would destroy his legacy. 15. Don Covay, the R&B king who hovered between life and death for 16 years. Do you believe sometimes the cruelest tragedy isn't dying, but watching yourself waste away day after day in a hospital bed? Don Covay was once known as the man who scribbled down lyrics touched by the divine. He wrote songs for Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones, Wilson Pickett, etching his name into 40 years of American music, but his life unraveled in silence. From the late 1970s, Don was entangled in lawsuits over the authorship of Chain of Fools and owed more than $300,000 in back taxes. In early 1992, after a drunken night in New Jersey, Don suffered a stroke right on the hotel stairs. From then on, the entire left side of his body was paralyzed, his voice almost completely gone. For 16 years, he lay in bed, only able to blink to communicate. Many said every night Don asked the nurses to play an unreleased demo tape, then cried until no tears were left. A colleague revealed that before he died, Don recorded more than 6 hours of testimony detailing how the label had robbed him blind. On January 31, 2015, he drew his last breath in the nursing home. His death was so quiet the press printed only a few lines of obituary. Soon after, rumors exploded that one of Don's estranged sons had sold all the publishing papers to cover the medical bills. In the end, a genius was left with nothing but those final tears. 14. Eddie Hazel, the funkadelic soul crushed by the fear of being poisoned. Try closing your eyes and listening to a 10-minute guitar solo. That's how Eddie Hazel turned despair into music. But that same despair is what killed him. In 1971, Hazel carved out immortality with Maggot Brain, a guitar solo hailed as the cry of a fallen angel. Yet after that triumph, Eddie fell into an abyss of drugs, alcohol, and arrests. People still remember how. In 1974, he was sentenced to a year in prison for assaulting a flight attendant. After prison, Hazel sank deeper into paranoia. Convinced Funkadelic's label was poisoning him to steal his publishing rights, many nights he barricaded himself in hotel rooms, covering every mirror, lying beside a knife because he was sure someone would come to kill him. A friend said in the winter of 1992, Eddie was hospitalized with a liver swollen to twice its normal size. In his delirium, he begged to have his guitar in bed, whispering, "If I die, I have to die with my music." And in the early morning of December 23, 1992, Eddie's heart finally stopped. His medical records said cirrhosis and respiratory failure, but a rumor claimed someone had injected him with a deadly mixture to shut him up about the stolen royalties. To this day, no one knows the truth. All that remains is a legacy of music both beautiful and terrifying, like a scar from a soul that never found peace. 13. Van McCoy died under the weight of loan shark debts. Why do the artists who wrote the happiest disco music die in such eerily quiet ways? Van McCoy is the saddest proof of that harsh truth. In the summer of 1975, the hustle exploded, making Van the father of the disco craze. Every night, thousands packed dance floors, spinning to his beat without knowing the man behind it was trading his health to keep the spotlight alive. Van was born with severe hypertension, but he hid it, afraid people would think he was weak. By 1978, as disco peaked, Van began coughing up blood. Friends said some nights he signed multi-million-dollar contracts with hands shaking as he swallowed heart pills. Even worse, Tabloids whispered that Van secretly borrowed from loan sharks to bankroll a chain of disco clubs that collapsed within 6 months, leaving him with crushing debt. On the morning of July 6, 1979, Van woke in his luxury Englewood apartment. He planned to head to the studio to finish his final recording, but as he stepped across the threshold, a heart attack slammed him onto the floor. Hours passed before anyone discovered him. By noon, his assistant knocked, then recoiled in horror to see Van's body cold and his eyes still open, staring through the ceiling. A few days later, when his last demo was released, people called it the final dance of a lonely man. But the biggest question about the massive debt and the rumors of death threats has never been answered. 12. Willie Hutch, the song that never got its ending. When news of Willie Hutch's sudden death spread across Detroit, many were so shocked they thought it had to be a cruel joke. The man who wrote the legendary "I'll Be There," the craftsman who shaped the Motown sound for 3 decades, had always said he wasn't afraid to die. But no one imagined death would come so quietly. On the morning of September 19, 2005, Willie was last seen leaving a corner cafe, carrying a briefcase filled with unfinished sheet music, just hours later. His youngest son arrived home to find the door locked from inside. He called out again and again, but there was no answer. When they broke the door down, the silence was chilling. Willie lay on his side on the living room floor, still clutching his music notebook. The death certificate listed sudden cardiac arrest, but for weeks, the media whispered about a hidden suicide note. A close friend said Willie had long feared the rights to dozens of songs he'd written would be stolen by the label after his death. The night before he passed, he called his lawyer, his voice trembling as he said, "If I'm gone tomorrow, look inside the metal drawer." But when the family searched it, the drawer was empty. 11. Arthur Conley, the singer of praise songs who died in exile. Have you ever wondered what drives a golden voice to vanish from its homeland, only to die alone in a foreign land? Arthur Conley, the creator of sweet soul music, is the living proof of that tragedy. In 1967, his hit shook America, selling millions and making Arthur a soul icon. But behind the lights, he was fighting to hide a sexuality he believed would ruin his career. A colleague said that on tour nights, Arthur would slip away from hotels, walking miles so no one would see him enter gay bars. By spring 2003, the pain grew so unbearable he could only breathe with morphine injections. On a cold, rainy night, a neighbor found Arthur kneeling on his kitchen floor, clutching his stomach, murmuring, "I'm not afraid to die, I'm just afraid no one will remember me." On November 17, 2003, he drew his last breath in that empty apartment. No family, no will. It took police 3 days to confirm his real identity. Some claimed Arthur had spent years sending money to an ex-lover in America, the same man who had once threatened to expose his secret. They said when the body was removed, the tape deck was still playing sweet soul music, but no one had the courage to play it again at the funeral. 10. Johnny Ace, the Bullet of Destiny. On Christmas Eve 1954, backstage at the City Auditorium in Houston was thick with cigarette smoke and drunken laughter. Johnny Ace was just 25, already the brightest young blues star in America, a man who could turn any ballad into a seductive sigh. But that night, no one suspected destiny had already chambered a bullet. Some said Johnny wanted to show off his usual trick, pressing a revolver to his temple and pulling the trigger without removing the bullet. A singer who was there recalled him joking, "I'm immortal, what are you all afraid of?" Then a sharp blast tore the room apart. Blood splattered across the wooden walls. Shards of bone landed on the table. Someone began to wail, while his manager crouched over the cooling body, too afraid to touch it. But the story didn't end there. Later, an assistant revealed that Johnny had bought the gun just a week before, after receiving a threatening letter from a gang demanding a cut of his tour earnings. Some believed he hadn't played Russian roulette at all, but ended his life out of fear his family would be attacked. At the funeral a few days later, the coffin stayed shut. Johnny's face could no longer be recognized. In the hearse, his mother sobbed his name, while his father clutched a hospital bill they couldn't pay. People whispered that almost all the fees from that final tour had vanished from the safe, never to be found. It all ended like a cruel joke. A man who sang of loneliness died in the middle of a crowd. On the Christmas night, he was supposed to perform one last song to welcome the new year. 9. Sam Cooke, the most mysterious death in Hollywood. And here is one of the most mysterious deaths in American music history. Sam Cooke was the father of soul, the man who paved the way for a generation of black artists to conquer America's mainstream charts. But at the end of his life, he plunged into a scandal as dark as it was baffling. On the night of December 11, 1964, Cooke died naked and tragic in the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles. People said he burst out to the front desk with no clothes on, pounding on the door, screaming the name of the woman who had disappeared with his wallet, in a frenzy. The motel manager, Bertha Franklin, fired her gun, and the bullet pierced Cooke's heart, ending his brilliant career in just a few chaotic seconds. When police arrived, his body lay face down on the cold cement, a coat barely covering him. Many rumors insisted this was no self-defense accident, but a carefully staged plot. The $3,000 cash missing, along with the mysterious woman, was never recovered. And perhaps the question of who really killed Sam Cooke will never have an answer. 8. King Curtis collapsed dead on his doorstep. There are deaths so brutal you can hardly believe they began with a simple argument. King Curtis, the famous tenor saxophonist who lifted soul and R&B to their peaks with Memphis Soul Stew, left this world in exactly that way. On August 13, 1971, Curtis returned to his apartment on West 86th Street, New York, after a recording session with Aretha Franklin. As soon as he reached the front steps, he saw a strange man blocking the door. Words flew back and forth, swelling into a shoving match. Witnesses said they heard Curtis shout, "Get out of my way! I don't owe you anything." Then the blade flashed under the porch light. The stab pierced his lung. Curtis staggered, blood spraying across his white suit jacket. He still tried to hold his saxophone as if it could shield him, but his hands were shaking too badly to keep a grip. Police arrived less than 5 minutes later, but it was already too late. Curtis was lifted onto a stretcher, while his saxophone remained in the spreading pool of blood. In the ambulance, he gasped, "My music, don't let it die with me." Those were his final words after his death. Rumors spread everywhere. Some claimed the killer was a thug who had tried to extort Curtis after he refused to play a private party. Others swore it was a dispute over royalties for the new album that turned into murder. His funeral was held in Harlem, where more than 2,000 people crowded together to say goodbye. But no one dared to speak aloud the question, why did a saxophone legend have to die on his doorstep? Turning Soul Serenade into the most painful farewell. 7. Jay Dilla, The Last Beat. There are geniuses who never needed a stage to become legends. Jay Dilla was one of them, a hip-hop wizard who could turn any scrap of samples into a street symphony. But no one knew that behind the hypnotic drum loops was a body crumbling day by day. In 2004, Dilla started feeling fevers that wouldn't go away, his vision turning hazy as if wrapped in fog. A doctor in Detroit diagnosed him with lupus, an incurable autoimmune disease. The bad news came just as he was invited to produce new albums for Common and Busta Rhymes. Dilla didn't turn it down. Instead, he rented a private ICU room and turned it into a makeshift studio. Friends said some nights he lay flat in bed, IV lines in both arms. Still insisting on adjusting the bass line, he rasped with a smile, "If I have to die, I want to die in the middle of a beat." In February 2006, Dilla's weight dropped to only 95 pounds. Nurses changed his bandages daily, wiping away the blood seeping from his veins. Despite the agony, he finished Donuts, his final album, recording most of it while breathing through an oxygen mask. On February 7th, his 32nd birthday, friends gathered around his bed, listening as he murmured the last hook. 3 days later, his breathing went silent. His mother broke down sobbing, her hand still clutching the headphones that had fallen onto her son's chest. There was a rumor that the label had offered to delay the release so he might live a little longer, but Dilla refused, saying, "I don't want anyone's pity." 6. Florence Ballard. The voice erased if Diana Ross was the face of the Supremes. Florence Ballard was their quiet heart. Born in the hardships of Detroit, that curly-haired girl once made Berry Gordy believe the Motown sound could never exist without her voice. But destiny was never fair. In 1967, Florence was fired from the group, losing every contract and source of income. Some said it was the result of drinking and arguments. Others insisted she was pushed out so Diana Ross could have all the spotlight. Without fame, Florence quickly faded. By 1975, she was on public assistance, raising 3 small children in a shabby rental house. A neighbor recalled many nights hearing Florence sobbing in the kitchen, her voice thick from alcohol. On February 21, 1976, she collapsed in the bathroom, her chest seizing with pain. Mount Carmel Hospital listed heart attack as the cause, but a nurse whispered she had been starving herself for days. When doctors asked her family how they would pay the hospital bill, no one knew the answer. Her funeral was a slap in the face to the Motown industry. No reporters, no fresh flowers, just a wooden marker that even misspelled her name. It took 2 weeks of fan donations to pay for a proper headstone. Ever since, Detroit has spoken of Florence like a ghost erased from music history. Some say on her last night, she sat by the radio, listening to old recordings and whispering, "They stole my voice, but not my memories." 5. Minnie Riperton, the desperate soprano. In the mid-70s, Minnie Riperton was adored around the world for a soprano voice as pure as an angel's. "Lovin' You" turned her into a phenomenon, topping Billboard and touching millions of hearts. But Minnie's life was even shorter than her highest notes. In January 1976, she received the diagnosis of late-stage breast cancer. Doctors urged immediate surgery, but Minnie refused, saying, "I'm making a new album, I can't just disappear." She hid her illness for nearly a year, until the pain forced her to come forward. Every recording session, Minnie clenched her teeth against the drain tubes. Friends said she often fainted mid-chorus and needed IV fluids right there in the studio. Still, she insisted on finishing every track. By April 1979, she weighed barely 90 pounds. The thick hair, once her proud signature, had all fallen out from chemotherapy. In her final week, Minnie was brought home. Neighbors recalled hearing her sing softly through the door. No microphone, no backing vocals, just the rawest voice left. On July 12, 1979, she died in bed, still holding a photo of her daughter Maya. A relative later admitted Minnie left a notebook instructing her husband not to arrange a noisy funeral. "If they love my voice, they'll remember," she wrote. Maybe Minnie knew better than anyone that no matter how cancer consumed her body, her music would remain pure and beautiful, like a final high note no one could silence. 4. David Ruffin. A body abandoned in the night. When he was the voice of the Temptations, David Ruffin made millions fall in love. He was the one who sang My Girl, the love song that topped every chart and became the spirit of Motown. But the stage lights were never enough to chase away the shadows inside him. After leaving the group in 1968, David began years of cocaine binges. Though he tried many times to quit, he always returned to the white powder as if addicted to despair itself. Many nights, people saw him wandering Detroit in a faded old coat, pockets rattling with sleeping pills and unpaid bills. On June 1, 1991, David visited the shabby apartment of an acquaintance in Philadelphia. The man later said he just wanted a couple of lines to feel normal, but in the early morning, David collapsed, the straw still in his hand, white foam seeping from his mouth, panicked. The host called a taxi to take him to Temple University Medical Center, but instead of going along, they left the body at the ER door. When nurses found him, David's heart had already stopped. He died in such anonymity, it took nearly a day to confirm who he was. An investigator later said there was a tattoo on his left wrist reading MG, a mystery no one could explain. Some believed it stood for My Girl, a last reminder of his glory days. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners, but no one ever forgot the sight of his body abandoned in the night, a brutal proof that a Motown legend could still die like a homeless man. And perhaps that was the most terrible tragedy of all. 3. Donny Hathaway, The 15th Floor and the Unfinished Song. If you've ever heard A Song for You, you know Donny Hathaway didn't just sing, he poured his soul into every word. His career was short but dazzling, and his death remains one of American soul's most painful mysteries. On the evening of January 13, 1979, Donny was invited to Essex House Hotel in Manhattan to discuss a new recording project. An assistant said he smiled gently, but his eyes were red, as if he had just survived a storm in his mind. Hathaway suffered from severe paranoid delusions. He believed someone had planted chips to record every note he sang. When he entered room 1519, Donnie asked them to close the curtains, lock the door. Then he slipped a demo tape into the cassette player. For 3 hours, he murmured songs to himself. When hotel staff came to check, the desk lamp was still on, the window cracked open to let in the cold wind, and the cassette kept spinning, his voice breaking apart between the hissing tape sounds. Around 11 p.m., Donnie stepped onto the narrow balcony. A witness on the floor below later testified they glimpsed him standing still, hands gripping the railing, face lifted to the sky. Then, without a scream or struggle, his body fell straight down onto the concrete courtyard. The impact shattered his skull. Donnie died instantly. Rumors said a few hours earlier he had called a close friend, whispering, "They're going to steal my voice and kill it." But to this day, no one knows who they were. 2. Phyllis Hyman. The last song on her birthday night. If you've ever been stilled by the aching ballads laced with jazz that Phyllis Hyman sang, you know why she was called one of the most soulful voices of the 70s and 80s. Phyllis wasn't just a powerful singer, she was a songwriter who penned her own lyrics soaked in hopeless love and loneliness with no exit. But behind the makeup and the elegant gowns, her life was becoming a string of nights filled with panic and despair. On June 30th, 1995, she was supposed to step onto a stage and sing to celebrate her 46th birthday. Instead, she quietly returned to her small New York apartment, locked the door, and swallowed nearly an entire bottle of sleeping pills. When her manager broke in, Phyllis lay motionless in an armchair, her face pale, one hand clutching a shaky suicide note that read, "I did the best I could." The next morning, the concert marquee was taken down, replaced by a short obituary. Many fans still couldn't believe the woman whose voice could silence a room like a blade chose to leave on the very night of her birthday. 1. Curtis Mayfield, the songwriter paralyzed forever. The final figure closing this long chain of tragedies is Curtis Mayfield, the brilliant songwriter behind classic soul-funk anthems like "Move On Up" and "People Get Ready," who turned music into a weapon for civil rights in the 60s and 70s. Curtis wasn't only the voice of hope, but the unbreakable symbol of a generation. Yet destiny struck him with a cruel blow. On August 13, 1990, while Curtis was preparing to perform outdoors in Brooklyn, a stage rig weighing over 1,000 pounds suddenly collapsed, crashing onto his neck in front of hundreds of people, leaving him instantly paralyzed from the shoulders down. From a free artist, Curtis was confined to a hospital bed for the rest of his life. But the most astonishing thing was that he refused to stop creating, though he could no longer lift his hands. Curtis recorded his final album lying flat, singing each line into a microphone suspended above his face. Every song was a defiance of pain. On December 26, 1999, his heart stopped, closing the extraordinary journey of a legend. Many believe that it was exactly that unbreakable will that made Curtis's music impossible to ever fade away. And those are 21 tragic stories that haunted an entire generation of music lovers. Each death didn't just end the life of a genius, it left wounds that never healed in the hearts of their fans. Do you believe that behind the spotlight there are always terrifying shadows, if these tragedies leave you restless and curious? Stay with me to uncover more buried truths and the fates that once burned bright, only to vanish in the most heartbreaking ways imaginable.